Hey, good day, everybody. Scott here, and today for Afterthoughts, I have Jen Snell, and she brought our message this morning on December the 12th, and on to do with joy. And if you haven't watched it, take a look at it. It's well worth it. But it's one of those interesting, again, much like what I find, much like peace and hope, a little bit elusive sometimes. We get confused with what it really means, especially what it means when it's connected with love, but also with God as well. I was intrigued, Jen, by when you referenced James, because it was like, yeah, that's James starts off with a head scratcher. Maybe, I don't know if you could elaborate more on that, because I find for myself, whenever I go through trials, it's tough.
It is
It's tough.
And he tells us to consider it all joy, which
Right.
just sounds, like ridiculous. Like, how can we consider joy in the middle of suffering? But I think, what I tried to talk about today was that we try and interchange the two words, happiness and joy. And they're really not, in the biblical sense, they're not really the same thing. Happiness, is really dependent on our external circumstances, whereas joy is more dependent on the eternal truths that we know about Jesus and who God is. And I think during our struggles, when we're having, as we were just saying, when you're having a really difficult time that is circumstances beyond your control, sometimes it's easier to lean on Jesus because you can't do anything. But I think in those moments when maybe it's things that you feel like you should be able to control, that's when it's harder to give the keys over to Jesus and let him drive the car.
Yeah. And I find that so very true. I remember when I was reading Dallas Willard's book, The Divine Conspiracy, he touches on James near the end of his book, where he speaks of that is a time of joy when we go through those difficult times, because we have applied the spiritual disciplines to our life. When we go through that, our dependency is on God, not on ourselves. And it's like, yeah, that makes sense. But I still find I don't want to, I want to grow without the struggle. That's what I want to do.
Yeah, don't we all, right? Like, when I look back at the times that I talked about in the service today, when I lost 4 people in the space of like a year and a half.
Yeah.
It's not that I didn't feel pain. It's not that I didn't feel sadness. I felt all of those things. But there was this undergirding of joy, of knowing who God is, and that none of this was a surprise to him, and that he was going to bring good out of all of that. And that's, I think, where joy comes in.
Yeah, and I think that's it right there. It's in the midst of, and this is what I just sense, in the midst of all the swirl of life. And I loved what you brought out, that Jesus never said life was going to be rosy. In fact, he said you're going to have troubles, right?
Yeah.
And he makes the comment that I have overcome the world. That's why. And I think that's where the joy is found right there. If we anchor into Jesus, then all the stuff, because we can't really, how much do we have control of?
Not a lot.
We don't, right? So we can anchor into Jesus. And I think at that point, then we can probably agree with James, consider it pure joy, because it's in that, that's where we find the growth in the hard times.
Exactly.
But,
and that's when we get to look back and see everything that he did for us. So.
Anyway, thank you so much for what you shared today.
Thanks for having us.
And it was good. It was good. Really good. So thanks, guys. Hope you have a great rest of the week, and we will see you next week.